Remember back in the days when watching anime used to be a taboo? Man, I miss those days. Now I'm not saying I wish those days would come. Well, never mind. That's exactly what I want. I want those days to come back sometimes. Why? Let me illustrate. Back in the days, I would have almost periodic phases where I would drown myself in anime. For the past few years, however, nope, not possible. Some things have changed. Watching Naruto used to earn you the bully card. But today, if you've watched something as gory as Tokyo Ghoul or Parasite, congratulations, you're one of the cool kids. There is absolutely nothing wrong with these two anime in particular. But I'd just like to make the point that today's audience has a much higher tolerance, and dare I say it, a much higher thirst for bloody, gory, and sexualized scenes. It is kind of interesting to take note, however, that these scenes where said violence and sex take place often involve a man being massacred and battered by women, but that is not always the case. I'm not trying to make a point there at all. It's just that I find it quite interesting that that happens quite often. Enough. The author gives the audience these sexualized or gory violent scenes, or both, and they are absolutely pointless. There are many reasons for explicit scenes involving extreme altercations. However, several anime these days appear to, in my opinion, have conveniently decided to masquerade their characters' torture series as a scene to make the character relatable, as a lot of viewers like to say, or make the series share something in common with reality, usually in the loss, pain, or domestic violence department. Now, for convenience sake, I shall just categorize the two reasons that people use to defend gory and violent scenes as just realism and relatability. A lot of anime has somehow managed to twist the meaning of these two, and viewers, in my opinion, again, appear to use these two as their favorite reasons to defend an anime. Now, to make things clearer, I'm going to try to define, given the context of the types of anime we'll be discussing, being Re:Zero and D.Gray-man specifically, usually in the psychological or fantasy and drama genres. In that context, realism for that sort of anime would traditionally use the concept of crushing brutality that reality can have on us. And the reason why there's a crushing brutality to reality is, is that it tends to stem from it being logical and yet almost completely unforeseeable. For reality, it is usually when a character, doesn't always have to be the main character, who will experience pain similar to mine, or at least conceivable to me, or maybe guilt, happiness, or relief. Any emotion, honestly. We're not limited to pain just because we're dealing with traditionally dramatic and psychologically scarring anime, sort of. But with these two generic, very basic definitions, with the context in mind, I am going to try to break down why, in my opinion, Re:Zero did not work out for me. In Re:Zero, the main highlight, the main hook for that story is obviously, as you know I'm going to mention, is that the concept of death is removed. Now, off the bat, people already find this amazingly cool for some reason. I don't really find it that cool, but on its face value, when you read it in the description and when you hear it from other people, it sounds amazing. It sounds like a really good idea, or it makes you excited at least, because there are a lot of possibilities to it, and you imagine grand things. In fact, I imagined it to be like a shonen, but that's not why I didn't really enjoy this story. It's not the main reason. But if it had been a shonen, I am very sure the anime would have performed better if they had taken note and decided to follow that type of genre style instead of purely a psychological and thriller based anime. So for the first time, the highlight of this anime is the first time when Subaru falls into a crisis. Subaru being the name of the main character. He can't seem to warn his peers, who are all priestesses, about a zombie army that they should fight and kill. And at least on the surface, it's basically he tries one way, he dies. He tries convincing everybody, he also dies. And that's not his objective. His objective is to survive, but the primary objective for him is to make sure the zombie army is killed and cannot harm anyone, especially the girl he has a strange attachment to, named Emilia. So initially, to be completely honest, I empathized with him, and then with everybody else feeling the same way, I almost felt pressured to feel that he was relatable and that this had an element of realism to it. But upon closer inspection, I changed my mind. Every mistake he committed, he could have rectified. When I rewatched that episode, I realized that, for one, Subaru could have fixed the mistakes and become smarter. It felt almost compulsory to me. If I had been the author, I would have had him die and then he would have learned something from it. And then he would have become smarter and devilish and cunning and charmingly cold. But instead, all I got was a breakdown of a character who had previously been cut up in God knows how many ways. All for him to break down at this scene. And for Rem, a person who he would have never been able to have a connection with had he not had his infinite lives ability, comfort him with a very long speech. My problem with this was everything felt hollow. I didn't feel any strong reason for Rem to fall for him. Don't get me wrong, I do not mean to outrage anyone who is a Rem waifu, part of the Rem waifu clan or whatever. But I definitely applaud Rem for being so dedicated to Subaru, but there was I didn't feel chemistry there at all. I didn't feel any reason for her to be so dedicated. And I felt that Subaru was not thinking at all, despite having been given infinite lives, while we live our own lives and learn so much and discuss so much. We were given a character who had to die countless times. They are countable, I'm so sorry. It is countable, I'm very sorry. That's not... Anyway, but I felt that he could have become so much smarter, and yet he broke down so easily. When I realized that if Subaru didn't have infinite lives, he wouldn't be alive to see her dedicate herself to him. It's very charming, and she is a good person, I'm sure, but at the end of the day, Rem is a character, Subaru is a character, this is an anime, and I am critiquing it because I feel that if you really want to get into relatability and realism on a story, then I would prefer to not limit myself and just come out and say that I am not at all for Rem waifu. In fact, I am for Subaru to get some brains and be what he could be. The best that he could be. Because with that ability of his, he could be so much more of a badass character. But here, I do not feel a personality. It's not so much about whining. I am okay with whining. But you gotta come out strong and come out something after that whining. Anyway, continuing from that, I just feel that through all of this, ReZero can still have such a strong following. Just think that the audience today can't fully understand what true loss and hope mean. I know I sound so evil here, but please hear me out. In D.Gray-man, if you watch from the original show up till this point, the main character has lost so much, and he didn't have to die so many times to see it. You can really feel it. By episode 3, I was basically in tears. Yes, it's very embarrassing to admit it, but I was. And also, finally, compared to ReZero, with all due respect, I feel that D.Gray-man has a much better mantra. My second thesis for this video would be the length of anime has changed, and I don't think I really like that. When I say length, I generally mean the number of episodes a particular anime will usually take up. Back in the days, 24 episode animes were common. Now, D.Gray-man comes back after 8 years, I get a 13 episode little fling. And it's quite a logical reasoning I have for this, for feeling this way. For shorter anime, for one, it's harder to dedicate myself to them. I know it's very ironic to say that, but longer animes would mean the author himself or herself had to dedicate time to make the various features, the various unique characteristics of their story, their environment, the characters, their backstories, and they would have time to tell them in a good pace. Sure, even D.Gray-man itself, back in 2006, had 10 filler episodes. And Naruto was known for fillers. But those were relatively small prices you had to pay for a story that would keep you hooked for years. And at the end of the day, it still meant that the author, compared to today, had to put more effort, in my opinion, to the characters for it to be published as an anime, a long anime, an epic anime. They would have to start with putting more effort and time into the manga. Theoretically speaking. I am no guru with the anime and manga making process, but that's just how I feel. Whereas shorter animes seem to have less developed characters, or the really big moments where I'm supposed to cry for the characters don't really connect. They're just a miss because I don't feel for that character. And that's ironically how I felt for Rem in ReZero. Yes, her story was very sad. It would be, realistically, if somebody actually went through that, realistically. But I did not feel it. Even though there was some time given to it, I still did not feel it. Another issue would be that there are people today who watch hundreds of anime, but they keep searching for the next anime just to preoccupy their time. Back in the days, you could just dedicate yourself to one. And while that's not strictly a problem, it does make anime feel a little less memorable. At the end of the day, there is nothing completely wrong with anime. I mean, it's still fine. It has always been fine to watch anime. There is nothing wrong with it. But I just feel that the audience's interpretation of a good anime has really changed, and I know at this point it's kind of obvious. I really do love D.Gray-man, but I'm not gonna be busy promoting it here any more than I have. But I would honestly urge people to at least, if not listen to anything I've said today, just consider this. If you are ever bored and feel like the anime today just for some reason doesn't satisfy you, check out some of the older anime. Today, people can give me graphics as a reason to watch an anime. I almost find that disgusting because I have watched some really beautiful anime, and frankly, the background art for those anime were horrendous.